Kevin, for the London Design Festival project that you and I are both involved with in different ways, we really want to emphasize why timber is so important, because that particular project, which is around a 6-story Singapore shophouse model pilot, we want to show we will be using timber, specifying timber as the predominant material. So why do you think timber is so important today?
I think there's a few reasons. In Asia, sustainability is important, but unlike in Europe and in other countries, it's not the main driver. So mass timber in Singapore, for example, has to work very hard in terms of being a very productive solution. Okay. The other big attribute from timber is that it's very light. So if we're talking about something like a shop house, we're in a confined area, the soil conditions are typically very poor, it's very logical to make a lightweight structure with large components that can be lifted and it can be built very quickly with a minimal of disruption. So I think that's a really critical area. As I mentioned, of course, sustainability is important. We're talking about a product that arrives on site already negative of carbon, negative. So, of course, when you work out the embodied carbon for the whole structure, it's very low. Okay, so I think that design for ease of construction, a lightweight material, a carbon negative material is very important. But lastly, there's also the ability for the structure to be disassembled at the end, so that those products could possibly be reused again. So there's another element to it. And I think these are the important attributes for this particular project.
Right. Well, that's very important. The other thing in Singapore, where the Building Construction Authority now is giving grants where companies, organizations, government organizations and others who choose to use timber, they pay for the cost difference. Is that an important step?
I think it is important to the developer, but personally, for me, I think the grants can also be negative, because when they offer grants, you get people wanting to use the product for the wrong reasons. In my view, I believe that the product has to pay for itself from the beginning. So its attributes in terms of productivity, ease of construction, sustainability must add up. The grant is just the cherry on the cake.
So Kevin, tell us about this whole project, how you got involved and why you got involved, and what we've ended up with here.
Okay, well, I mean, this was an opportunity for us to build the first PEFC certified timber project in Singapore. Although it's quite, I would say, quite conservative in terms of its size, but it has a lot of significance, because I think, you know, this is a really beautiful application of using timber. I mean, if we look at the setting here, we consider, you know, National Heritage Board, we consider the history behind Changi Chapel and the ambience of this environment. This is where timber really, really shines. You can't imagine building this out of any other material, again, and having the same feeling when you walk in here. So I think this is an example of where timber's beauty and, you know, time and place is a perfect example. So I think that's something that was on the forefront of the designer's mind. As far as we're concerned, the designer conceptualized this structure. We then took that concept and turned it into a kit of parts that could be easily installed. So this structure was designed in terms of engineering and detailed and supplied by our company, Howventura. But the install itself was done by the contractor under our supervision. So a big part of what we're doing now, especially in developing markets, is enabling and teaching others on how to install these products. The whole point of doing off-site methodologies is the installation is supposed to be simple and easy, right? So if somebody else can install the structure under our supervision who's never done it before, then we know we've scored a win. And that's basically what we see from this structure. Yeah.
Now, also, this is quite unique in that it's the first time it's been a PEFC certified project in Singapore, and it's also involved double helix tracking technologies and source map. Just tell us how that worked.
So, you know, we've always been striving to improve the narrative behind timber products. As I've mentioned in the past, I don't think that the industry's done a particularly good job over the last 2 decades in terms of promoting the the real value of wood in terms of its contribution to the environment. A lot of people say, oh, you know, you're cutting down trees, why are you cutting down trees? And people don't really understand the narrative behind it. So I think it's really important, especially in today's era where people don't believe necessarily what you say, to have real evidence behind any claims that are made. So, you know, of course, this is PEFC timber, but the timber is also using an interface called source map, can be tracked back to the forest that it came from, and we can see where the journey of the timber traveled, and it's backed up with evidence in terms of documentation, where it was machined and milled, and of course its onward journey onto Singapore and the final installation. So we've covered that, what you call chain of custody, all the way through, and we've demonstrated it. Beyond just giving a certificate, we've demonstrated it on a map, and within that map we can bed media, we can bed, you know, the designer's insights and any other relevant data in there for the public to actually interrogate and see themselves. So I think that's a really innovative way of people understanding the benefit of building with timber.
Yeah. And there's no reason why you couldn't have a plaque or something here that people could scan and then hear the story as well?
That's exactly right. So that we can paste a QR code, and from that QR code, you press on it, go straight into the source map, and then all the information is there for you to find out and discover yourself.
Right. Yeah. Oh, so that's good. So that's a way of demonstrating to the user, the consumer as well, that both the value of timber, but also the importance of doing the certification verification process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, you know, certification in the past, it's always been something tough in terms of people paying for, because, you know, it's a certificate and people don't necessarily even believe it. So when you prove to them and show them what goes in, I mean, there's a fantastic amount of effort that goes in from the forest all the way through to the consumer to make sure that resource is sustainable, that it is, you know, harvested with best practices, and that all the way through the supply chain, you know, it's optimized and maximized so that there's maximum benefit for the tree that's been felled in the forest. And I think that's where these sorts of visual tools, I think, can add a great deal of value. I mean, ultimately, somebody has to pay for sustainability. Sure. So if they're paying for it, they need to see it for themselves, you know.
But there's certainly, as we're both aware, there's certainly the long-term gain as well in terms of its lasting qualities. It's low carbon or zero carbon in terms of its involvement. So if you're pricing it or valuing it over a period of time, that's not a factor, is it?
Well, I mean, again, it's mass timber is not a solution for every project. I don't think we're going to see HDB apartments in Singapore built of mass timber in the near future. It's time and place. We look at this setting, you cannot imagine it being built of anything else. If there's a premium, it paid for itself, right? So other projects have different, like the school, the indoor sports halls that we do with these massive timber trusses. They just add a certain level of beauty to that whole environment, and also the ambience as well. I think that pays for the premium. So, you know, in some areas where there's restrictions on load-ins, having a light material, it pays for itself. Having something that's large format that can be installed very fast with few people, and very importantly, more safely, again, that pays for it. So it always has to work for itself. Each project, there has to be a value proposition that mass timber contributes to.
Sure. And the fact that timber is storing carbon and not, it's not like steel and concrete that are embodying carbon in a bad way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, as I mentioned previously, in Singapore, sustainability is important, but sometimes it's very hard to actually get dollars attached to that. So to me and to you, the carbon story is extremely important. In Singapore, it has to work a lot harder than that. So, you know, carbon negative is basically one of the key drivers in many markets around the world. And we hope that in Singapore, when we start to measure carbon a little bit more in terms of the building process, that will come to the forefront and add more value to use of timber.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Kevin. tell me about this project, because it was quite unique in terms of the way Ventura was involved. So tell me how it started and how it proved.
Yeah, it was a very interesting story behind. So when the architects approached us, architect was Architect SG, they want to do something really unique, as Kevin mentioned earlier, that they want to build something in timber for obvious reasons. And then we guided them through the main concept requirements. And of course, they had some very specific design requirements. For example, if you see these cylinder components, they need to build that in the same material as the columns and the beams. So that's the kind of design intention that we had to meet. So we guided them through the certain requirement in terms of the specification, regulatory compliance, the fire, etc. And then that's how we came on board when the tender was out, as a mass engineer timber specialist to supervise the job.
So you specified and ordered from the European supplier exactly the, I don't know what you call these things, like tubes up here. So
they call it as cylinders.
Cylinders, and then the beams.
Yeah.
So you had to be quite specific in terms of those.
Exactly.
And they arrived here.
Yeah, and everything was prefabricated to sites. That's also a very good example of doing a project under direct supervision of a mass engineer timber specialist. And it's the first of its kind in Singapore actually so far. So again, I would really appreciate the way the architect SG came out with this solution. It's very beautiful, as you see the environment here. You have a chapel behind, blue timber looking beautiful. Construction has been done using columns and the beams. So, and also the National Heritage Board. So they put up a very big effort to bring this concept to this place, to construct using sustainable timber materials.
And it's a case where you are the MET specialist, but you didn't do the physical building this time. So it shows how you can work with others and advise others and supervise.
Exactly, very, very good question, Ken. So basically what we did was here is a kind of different approach. Normally when we undertake the jobs, we do design, supply and installation by ourselves. However, in this scenario, we did the design, we supply the components, all prefabricated, delivered to site, and then the appointed main contractor installed it by themselves. We gave them a manual, we gave them the component list, fixings, and our supervisor was there full time. And that's the way actually it should work in mass engineered timber, because it should be easy to install. And we managed to demonstrate that, doing that in Singapore practically, that you could do it with the proper supervision.
So do you see the opportunity for this to grow, that it's a role that Ventura can play in an advisory role, if you like,
yeah,
to encourage more architects and builders to use timber, but also you can be there to help them with the ordering and help them with the specifications, etc.
Exactly. I think that should be the way forward in terms of assembling and installation, the components. There is definitely a possibility for whoever is building that to build it by themselves, of course under direct supervision of the timber supervisor and the engineer. So I think that's the way forward it should go, because mass engineered timber, we treat it as a prefabricated components. So it should be easy to install with the proper manual and the fixing list.
And I know in the case where you've done the building as well, labour costs on site, labour, you know, the amount of labour you need on site is less than what you would do for a normal building. Was that the case here as well?
That was one concern, and then also there are other concerns as well, because the main contractor want to take on board the scope under them, because they wanted to coordinate with other stuff they're doing in terms of schedules and everything else. And then we were more than happy to do that, because we wanted to try that out as well. So we were closely coordinating with the client as well as the main contractor to make that happen. And here you go, you're under the beautiful timber structure.
Great, thanks Chetty, that's
All right,
great.
Thanks, Ken.